our feeding programs. All this happened in very remote towns with very small population. Apparently, the local politicians did not bother to give them much thought. We do not think the people there buy much of your products or services. So the question now is, why should you care if their children go to school if they don't have a direct impact on your bottom line? The reason is this. Research has shown that building nations where everyone can live and thrive and enjoy the benefits of economic growth is the best way to create even more growth. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development said that in Mexico and New Zealand, rising inequality took away Italy, in United Kingdom and the United States. The cumulative growth rate would have been 6 to 9 percentage points higher had income disparities not widened. On the other hand, greater equality helped increase GDP per capita in Spain, France, and Ireland prior to the Great Depression. In the Philippines, the richest 20% of the Philippine population received 52% of the country's total income in 1994, nearly 11 times the share received by the poorest 20%. This was a marginally worse situation than in 1985. And I quote from a Forbes magazine article. Indeed, from 1957 till today, aside from brief periods of improvement, the country's Gini ratio has changed little, consistently remaining the highest or one of the highest in Southeast Asia. In 2009, the poorest 20% of the population accounted for just 4.45% of national income. Close quote. Our country's best entrepreneurial minds are in this room. We hope these are not just numbers for you, because in reality, inclusive growth is an issue that affects real people on the ground, like the principal and the parents who built a school with only 8 posts to start with, 10,000 seed money, and just an indomitable desire to solve a painful problem in their community. They came together to address a clear and present need in their community. But with the donation of 300,000 pesos from outside their community, what was impossible became possible. Inclusive growth is not just critical for those in the fringes of society that we have vowed to serve, but also for your businesses to grow sustainably. Businesses and capital markets have been fueling global growth for decades, creating wealth for nations. But while market-led economic growth transformed whole chunks of the global map, its unfortunate byproduct was the exclusion of swaths of population who did not gain equality of economic opportunity. Faced with this stringent problem, corporations around the world are reinventing capitalism and turning to disruption and innovation in the way they do business. While traditional businessmen want to keep wealth circulating within a small, closed group, a new crop of businessmen now know that as more people break the cycle of poverty, more people can afford to buy their products and services. They know that when business is done as usual, the income gap widens. That is why they are embracing business unusual. How? Profit is now no longer the sole driver of growth. Shared value is. This way, growth does not have to slowly trickle down to the poor. As the private sector redefines products and pricing models, to turn the swaths of population that have been left out as their new target market. Shared value is created. Growth and progress happen at the same time. We need growth for all, not just for a select few. Progress that benefits only the elite is no progress at all. There are issues in this conversation that may ruffle some of our feathers. We might have to break monopolies, correct poor labor practices, reassess our tax system, among other things. I also personally believe that there is value in considering the continuation and expansion of the current social protection system through our Pantawid Pamilya Pilipino program and our PhilHealth. We may also have to think about incentivizing the adoption of a more inclusive value chain model that will create more rural jobs and livelihood. This should facilitate increased productivity in agriculture without compromising our competitiveness as we strive to grow our domestic and export market share. Linked to all this, I also cannot overemphasize the importance of creating a better and more efficient business environment. Removing inefficiencies in doing business enhances the growth of both big and small corporations. We in government must also continue to find better ways to enable our micro, small to medium-scale enterprises to be more integral players in growing our economy. More than 99% of our companies in the country are small, and they employ 64.97% of our people. As we support small players and social entrepreneurs, we bridge progress to the excluded bottom. Gone is business as usual. Let us now embrace business unusual. Celebrate disruption and innovation, and create wealth and profit shared by both top and bottom. The Office of the Vice President is committed to help in changing the face of poverty in the next 6 years. We want to focus on 5 areas: hunger and food security, universal health care, rural development, education, and people empowerment. The President has recently offered us a cabinet position as Housing Secretary. And as you know, we have gratefully accepted. Housing is also one of the things that my husband Jesse used to work on when he was still mayor of Naga City and when he became Interior Secretary. Before he passed away almost 4 years ago, Jesse was working on innovations that would allow the government to build cheap, climate change resilient, in-city on-site housing developments for the urban poor. We will not be working from scratch in this portfolio. We will be hitting the ground running. We want to address the 1.4 million housing backlog within our term. We will disrupt and we will innovate. We will enjoin the private sector to be our partners in providing not just houses, but decent and affordable communities where our people will find jobs, where our children can safely go to school, attend church, run around and play safely. We are not asking for your charity. Companies like Finma Properties have proven that these developments can be also commercially viable, as shown by their on-site resettlement investments in Quezon City. In the past, informal settler families would pay anywhere from 1,500 pesos to 3,500 pesos per month to dwell in a 10 square meter space with no proper sewage and drainage system. Through FINMA's partnership with the Quezon City government, Pag-ibig Fund and several partner NGOs, ISFs today, shell out only a little more than 2,000 pesos as monthly amortization through Pag-ibig for decent 26 square meter homes and with loft provisions that have proper sewerage and drainage and security of tenure. Inclusive growth needs inclusive business, and that means corporations address a social need in a commercially viable way. This is just one example of addressing the 1% problem that perpetuates the current instability of our nation's social order, where the poor continue to be poor and get left behind. I am positive you can think of more ways to help. There are so many things that we can do, but so little time. More important than what is how we will do them. Collaboration and consultation would be key. With you, the private sector, who brings so much of your resources, your commitment, your expertise, your efficiency, and your networks to the table, and with the beneficiaries themselves. Over the course of our work as an alternative lawyer, working with the marginalized, we have discovered that the best solutions come from those who have lived in poverty themselves. They know better than highly paid consultants, or are equally knowledgeable about what is good for their food. For instance, when informal settlers are included at the table at the very start of planning their communities, these projects tend to be more successful. It is true, consultations take time and trust issues need to be addressed. But when the poor are given a seat at the table and their voices are heard, that is when miracles happen. Imagine what we can achieve in 6 years. The idea of the unlimited ways to do good fuels my passion and gives me energy, even as I try to get used to interesting changes that come with my new job. For both of us, the government and the private sector, we need to embrace this disruption from within, or else we risk being at the mercy of global developments. This elusive, inclusive growth can only happen if we ourselves make it part of our personal inner scorecard. The fact that you are here indicates that you are willing for us to work together. Like the parents and the principal huddled together to build that small school. Working together has a way of igniting passion even from those who may be sitting on a fence. That urge to collaborate and build bridges of understanding is our single most important resource. The imperative to harness our diverse gifts and unique roles in society towards concrete platforms of collective action can no longer be ignored. Let our driving force for this be the inclusion and the transformation of the lives of the majority of our people who have long been excluded from the benefits of the wealth that has been created. Personally, I am filled with gratitude and enriched whenever I am given the opportunity to be an instrument in changing lives for the better, especially for those who have less. I believe it will not be different for you. We will be knocking on your doors, the doors of your boardrooms, and we hope you welcome us. Thank you very much. Thank you all for listening. Magandang umaga po muli sa inyo.
Identify for themselves what projects in the Philippines also need that could also be commercially viable.
Two things are missing. One of that is people are not really given enough voice in the planning process. Most of the programs are just given to them with the very best of intentions, of course. The donors and the sponsors who give These are this will fulfill the greatest need of the people. But from experience, it would be better to give them a seat at the table from the planning process, not later in the day. Because if they're allowed to air their voices and allowed to plan with the sponsors, the projects become very, very successful. And one of this is the problem with housing. When my husband was still secretary of DILG, they conceptualized a program called People's Plan. The relocation of informal settlers are done through a People's Plan, where people themselves plan everything, where they will renovate, talk with landowners, do everything by themselves, and just make them feel that government is there whenever their plans are. These were the most successful relocations.
I think one question in everybody's minds, and then just go ahead and say, how do we help you in housing? And what are your plans to hold one of these consultations that brings everybody to the same table? What are the needed plans, and what ideas might all this?
You know, I mentioned in my speech that we have identified 5 core programs already. Hunger and food security, education, rural development, empowerment, universal health care. This was conceptualized with the thought that I won't be given any cabinet post. So we started to hit the ground running already. Right after, even before my inauguration on June 30. What we're doing now is, the only power that the Vice President has, or the only role that the Vice President is given under the Constitution is just to be there, just in case something happens to the Presidency. We have studied what the previous administrations did, at least the Office of the Vice President did. And most of the things that they did were more ceremonial and political. There wasn't much space for us to do advocacy work. So when we started analyzing the budget, when we started analyzing what's there for us, there wasn't enough elbow room for us to do policy and advocacy work, and we wanted to change it. We started asking BBM to allow us to give more space for advocacy work. And that's what we're doing now. The reason why we transferred office was we wanted to save on money. Right now, we will be saving at least 200,000 a month. That will give us more space to do what we want to do. But since we don't have any mandate to execute programs, what we intend to be doing is to act as a convener of sorts. There are so many groups out there doing advocacy work, so many private civil society groups, NGOs, doing CSR-related work, but there's no umbrella program for all of them to be doing this. So what we're doing now is we're holding a lot of advocacy meetings, getting all these groups together. We're doing now a sort of an environmental scanning. Which groups are doing advocacy work for hunger and food security? We'll lump them in one group. Which groups are doing education-related CSRs? And we want to make streamline all that they're doing. Para walang doble, we will provide a forum for all these groups to talk together and discuss what could I do, what could the other groups do, and siguro, yun, be a conduit for all of this.
Speaking of an environment like scan and crowdsourcing for ideas, for opportunities, one of the development experts who frequently contributes to this work wrote about Benjamin Delbene. Wrote that to address the housing backlog, housing should be addressed not as a noun, rather as a verb. In other words, he was saying that ownership is good, but we should throw into the mix affordable housing made affordable by rent and so on, as being done in Germany, in a lot of first world countries where ownership is not necessarily high. Does this resonate with you, and might this open up some ideas where other models for housing might be participating in the private sector?
I was appointed Friday.
I was appointed Friday. I was in Lanao when the president pulled me up. When I reached Manila, I had to summon some of the officials of HANSI to give me a briefing already. And I was quite surprised by the numbers given to me. I mentioned in my speech that there's a 1.4 million backlog of houses, but they were saying that's not the real number. It might balloon to 5.5 million. If we will be able to have an honest-to-goodness inventory of all who do not have recent houses. But you know, the bulk of the problem is in Metro Manila. And in Metro Manila, there are not so many lands left anymore for these houses. So we're looking at the model demonstrated by Singapore and Hong Kong to be able to combat this problem, meaning set our sights on medium to high-rise housing projects instead of vertical housing. Medyo malaki yung problema. Medyo malaki yung problema sa houses. There has to be a amendment to many policies that are there already. HATC is not exactly a department of housing. It's just a coordinating council of 6 other key shelter agencies. So, strictly speaking, it doesn't have much power. And all the key shelter agencies are working on their own. We have a lot of cleaning up and straightening out of policies so that we will become more effective. But the main thrust really is to do away with the backlog, at least in the next 6 years. We hope to be able to do that. I would like to think that this administration is fully supportive of that. The past administration has done a lot of already, but because of the backlogs that are there, we really have to work to bend over and work backwards so as to erase everything.
We understand the Vice President has to be on her way to her next appointment, Vice President Robredo.